It was dark, cool and quiet, empty most of the time, but at other moments filled with sound and light and the bee-sting pains in the crook of his elbow. Maybe it was some sort of karma, a comeuppance from all the times he had hovered over some creature in the exact same position. For the hundreds upon hundreds of blood vials he had pulled from veins both human and other. And not other as in animals, although he had done that too, but otherworldly. Howard Brighton considered himself, for most of his life, a genius. He didn't let it go to his head, enjoying a relatively normal childhood, but the truth of it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. It was a good thing, too, because he never grew above 5'5", and physical strength held little interest to him. His power lay elsewhere, and he spent a long time waiting to claim it in full. Growing up in the heat of the technological revolution that let entities like Umbral gain such significance was all he knew, and it was almost expected that anyone with above-average intelligence would move into an AI-focused career. It was fascinating, sure, watching artificial intelligence become something more than the sum of all its parts, building and creating and shaping the world into an entirely new thing. But it never gave Howard the spark. As a teen, he was talented in computer sciences, in a middling sort of way, but it wasn't what drew him like a winged insect to a flame. Howard Brighton wanted to know what was inside. Not inside some delicate, incredible machine, but what was inside the living. The original machine. Flesh and blood and bone. He wanted it. Wanted to pick it apart and study it until he knew the pathway of every cell and what lay between the spaces of firing synapses. It was a perfect, visceral, sinewy thing, and he wanted to know it in a way that no other man ever had. Unfortunately, though, as long as people had been walking around with beating hearts in their chests, there had been other people who wanted to deconstruct exactly how that heart thumped on and on. Nowhere near the first to delve into the intricacies of the body, Howard found it infuriatingly easy to find the answer to any question he had between the pages of some book. Hell, some were 3 times older than he was, and right there on the yellow paper of the text was a man asking and answering the same question he was. It wasn't fair. Stingy, greedy even. Certainly there had to be some honor left among the scientific community, some rule that said, save some for the rest of us. But there wasn't. So, with a doctorate at 31 years old, and his name whispered along with the words, most brilliant biologist of our time, Howard Brighton was utterly bored and adrift in his life. None of it was different. Nothing gave him the spark. Dog, cat, monkey, snake, chicken, human, even a grasshopper. They all broke down to the same basic parts. He was starving for something warm and alive, with some new novel secret in the socket of their leg or hidden behind the cage of their ribs. Then, Umbral found him, and another path was illuminated. It would take less than a year, and Howard could go from biologist to exobiologist. With the change of title, a world of new possibilities would open up to him. Umbral had only needed microbiologists at first. It was nothing but finding an amoeba here, describing an interplanetary virus there. No one ever thought that Umbral would get their hands on any sort of alien life on the macro scale. Even when they had their stroke of luck, it was a bit by accident. It was just a waiting game once the world started to change and lean on technology so heavily, for antiquated laws like the Outer Space Treaty to be repealed. Power was no longer kept under the name of a nation, but under the umbrella of corporations like the Umbral Group. And for Umbral, dominion over the thermosphere was just another chess piece they could put on the board against their competition. Under the guise of the unassuming weather satellite Sky Tracker, Umbral instead launched the Hyper-Pulse Particle Cannon. It was equipped to bring down any threat or surveillance satellites to be used against Umbral, but they hadn't accounted for an anomaly to throw off their most powerful weapon yet. Just like there had always been men interested in the working of the human creature, there had always also been people looking skyward and reporting the mysterious things they saw above them. Pictures of unidentified flying objects could be traced back to ancient times, and millions of sightings were still reported year by year. Still, not even Umbral had evidence of anything besides microscopic extraterrestrial life, and it should have stayed that way. But within minutes of the Hyper-Pulse Particle Cannon being activated, reality split in high Earth orbit. It was effortless, just a small crackle and then a seam opening, allowing the almost featureless craft to slip through before shutting once more. The pilot of the craft might have made that trip hundreds of times, and it might have been that comfort that allowed the hyperpulse to fire upon it. The strike was a sharp laser slash, cut short when the Umbral handlers down below panicked at the quick activation. The craft fell to Earth, landing somewhere deep in the South American jungle. It had taken everything in Umbral's arsenal to hide the fall and wipe any mentions of it from the internet, but they managed. At the same time, they dispatched recovery crews, only the most discreet and experienced. Howard knew little of the hyperpulse incident after that. Viridian Laboratories was already active, and close enough that it was the obvious choice to hold the craft. A hangar was built below ground, along with a lab dedicated to researching both the craft and anything living or dead that might reside inside. The crash had damaged the craft severely, but regardless, it immediately became the most valuable thing that Umbral Group had ever gained. It was so unprecedented, so unexpected, that new methods of security and veils of secrecy were enacted just for the craft. In a single day, almost all the power of Umbral shifted to get the craft hidden and safe. He still remembered the day they brought it in. Doors were built and disguised as the jungle floor, leading down to the hangar bay. It was surreal to watch what looked like the earth split and lift, displaying the slate gray of the tunnel and ramp leading down. Umbral had commanded the scientists to stay on the lab side of the glass and metal wall separating it from the hangar. It was airtight, and there was to be full decontamination protocols when working with the ship in the future. He didn't know what he had been expecting, but the image of a flying saucer with blinking red and green lights had been banished as the craft was slowly moved beneath the ground. It came on the back of an enormous flatbed, looking so out of place among Umbral's black-on-black machinery that it hurt his eyes to look at it. It was so unnatural that it appeared like a paper cutout from a magazine taped over reality. Fake, flat yet mirror bright, all at the same time. The craft was shaped like an odd falcon, with the wings pushed back in a dive. Not a single visible window, light, or even a seam was apparent on the surface of it. Crumpled on one side, the damage from the crash reminded Howard of a paper airplane that had crashed into the ground too hard. It was less damaged than he had expected, though, and word filtered through the scientists that it had been regenerating itself, slowly but surely. In days, it would be flawless once more, as if the crash had never happened. The craft should have been the peak of discovery, not just for Umbral, but in the world's history. But it was immediately eclipsed by what they found alongside it. Umbral had sent 6 soldiers out for the initial first contact with the ship, requesting that pictures and all other sorts of data on the craft be brought back, so that the first wave of recovery crews knew what they were getting themselves into. When the original 6 of the advanced party never returned, they sent another. Under the Eclipse Initiative, they had plenty of experts to spare. 3 returned. The trio had the data necessary, but there was something off with them, like a sickness that ate away at their minds, but had no pathogenic source that could be found. Luckily for Umbral, they also returned with the collected data from the first 6 soldiers, and those records painted a murky picture of what had happened. Whatever the pilots were, something about them distorted the photos and video evidence, but not so much that it was impossible to see that they were something other. In the images, there were 3 of them, 2 intact and 1 potentially deceased. They were taller than the soldiers, almost 8 feet, but willowy and slender, almost skeletal in nature. The distortion was the heaviest at the faces, making them unintelligible black circles atop thin, long necks. In fact, all 3 pilots looked like the structures of their bodies were dark and bony. Their clothing was the same gunmetal gray of the ship. One pilot carried their dead companion, and in the video evidence, when it wasn't too distorted, a sound could be heard, booming and low, that caused the human soldiers clear agony. They could be heard screaming, along with panic pleas for God and family. All 6 of them were armed, but when their weapons were inspected, not a single one of them had been fired. The soldiers' skin was split, oozing and red, like they had been face to face with some orphan radiation source. The cause of death was unclear. Then, there was the prisoner. The 3 soldiers that returned from the second advance party couldn't bring it with them, but as soon as the existence of it was communicated, it immediately became the primary objective. So, horrified by the pilots, the first advance party didn't even get a picture or any information about the prisoner, but the second party came through. On the crumpled part of the ship, there was a place that had buckled, splitting and expelling something from the inside. It was an enormous cube made from some sort of thick glass, nearly the size of a compact car, and perfectly symmetrical. Like the ship, there was no seams of obvious places where the cube could be opened, and the thing inside of it writhed and slithered along the inside like a viscous jelly. Everyone's agreed-upon hypothesis was that the cube had hit the inside of the craft during the crash, but was only halfway knocked through the strange metal hull. As the craft healed itself, it pushed out the cube, like a splinter working its way out of the bottom of someone's foot. By the time the second advance party could document it, the cube was hanging on to the ship by a single corner. When they were ready to retrieve it, the cube had been worked completely out, falling into the jungle floor where it lay until Umbral could move it. At first, it was believed that the gelatinous thing inside was inanimate, but with the pilots gone, the Umbral agents sent to retrieve the cube quickly concluded that whatever was inside of it was indeed alive, and it really, really wanted to come out. A prisoner of the pilots, unintentionally dumped on Earth, 2 alien objects, one alive and one not, in a single day. The higher-ups at Umbral must have been beside themselves with joy. For weeks, the scientists at Viridian Labs investigated every inch of the ship and the cube, but frustratingly, never found a way inside of either. The prisoner rolled and undulated, its flesh flashing all sorts of colored patterns. It was crammed so tightly inside, and Howard remembered thinking how miserable it must be. Every once in a while, they would see a lone tentacle pressing forward through the mass, but otherwise there were no features on the thing at all. It scared him to the absolute core of his being, but at the same time filled him with a curiosity so strong that it took him days to recognize what it was. Finally, he was feeling the spark again, even if he could only watch the thing from outside its glassy prison, and nothing more. They needed to get to it, but the cube was nearly impenetrable, and no one knew what would happen once the prisoner was free. Surely, after so long in captivity, it would be full of violence, unpredictable and dangerous. But leaving it inside wasn't an option either. The Umbral group wanted their alien, and they wanted it as soon as possible. The prisoner raged when it was finally released into its new cell, made of thick, almost impenetrable glass. Its initial prison had been pierced with a tiny, self-contained thermobaric charge that had managed to break off pieces of the cube in former tests. They had activated the charge once the second cell had been completed, and watched as the creature made its futile escape into the new holding tank. It crawled over the floor, spreading over every inch of the cell, leaving an iridescent trail behind it. The only difference in the cell was a set of AI-driven collection tools, thin robotic arms that would take the samples from the creature needed by the scientists. Everyone in the sterile lab was horrified at the way the creature fought the arms, but Viridian's machine held strong, taking its pound of flesh and handing it over to the scientists once it was done. Howard didn't want to see the thing in pain, but finally being one of the few to have the privilege of looking over the samples first was too tempting a prospect to ignore. Maybe he was a horrible person, but as the weeks passed, all the exobiologists wanted, needed more. Howard watched, his mouth pulled into a grim line as the robotic arms cut more and more from the prisoner. An ounce, 2 ounces, a vial full, a pound. So much of that clinging flesh that the collection arms trembled under the weight of it. They vivisected it, watching it shudder in unimaginable pain, and celebrated nonetheless. Because truly, the creature was incredible. Through the properties of the samples, it gained its earthly name, the chimeric anomaly, or more simply the Chimera. Before it escaped and destroyed all the beautiful things created from those pieces of it, the Chimera was found to be able to regenerate its damaged body, shift shape and form to some degree, and absorb all necessary nutrients through osmosis. The separated pieces of the creature could still move and articulate, and though the loss of so much of its mass weakened the Chimera, it never truly died. The potential of such a thing, to help humans regenerate lost limbs, breathe underwater, or even extend and achieve long life, was priceless beyond words. Through sleepless nights, Howard worked, drinking down the knowledge like water, the truth of it pumping through his veins like blood. God, it was a brilliant few months, he thought to himself, still unable to even shift around to get more comfortable on his hospital bed. Given the chance, I'd do it all over again, He still couldn't raise himself to full consciousness, but he was getting close. Howard could feel the existence of his fingers, his toes, and the awful burns that coated most of his frame. The worst of it was near his temple, where the white phosphorus had scorched him to the bone. So much of him didn't want to even survive. But the creature, the Chimera, it might still be out there, and if it was, Howard needed more from it. They should have known, but every member of Viridian Laboratory was too high on being the favored child of Umbril Group, and on the monumental nature of their discoveries. Like a creeping cancer, the Chimera bled those separate but still articulated cells through the tiniest spaces where the robotic arms connected. The almost invisible tendrils worked away at the metal there, and by the smallest degrees forced its way to the outside. No one was even aware when the first tendril wriggled out, or the second or third. Alarms weren't sounded until dozens of them had worked free, and they put emergency protocols into action. By then it was chaos. Trying desperately to get the Chimera contained, the sounds of glass shattering in cold storage went unnoticed. All of the separated pieces of the Chimera that were still intact, the samples, pushed open the cold storage drawers and slithered out, first finding each other, and then, once they were large enough, moving towards the hangar. He saw the first casualty, a woman he had worked with for years, occur when she tried to block a blob of the Chimera from progressing. It crawled up her body, into the cavities of her nose, and once she collapsed, back out of her ears and once more onward. Maybe the ones that died there in the beginning were the lucky ones, because once the Chimera was free, chaos became a bloodbath. The separated pieces melded with the escaped tendrils, forming one large tentacle that could rip the entire collection of metal off the glass. The Chimera spilled forth, whole once more. Armed guards flew down into the hangar, guns drawn, bullets flying. Those, the Chimera consumed. Some scientists it obliterated in the same way. Others it ended with deceptive gentleness, laying their visually unharmed bodies down outside of the lab to be used later. But worst of all was its voice. Free from its prison, the Chimera forced its consciousness into all of their minds, screaming its agony and rage in wordless sounds and visuals that made Howard's head pound and the acid in his stomach churn. Tears ran down his face as he fled, pushing aside the still living co-workers he passed and stumbling over the dead. As the Chimera killed, its voice in his head got clearer, the words coalescing from the din. Just fragments at first, and then the chanting of names, those Howard had worked with, and even his own, like a warning. Somehow it knew them all, and Howard knew in his bones that it wouldn't be satisfied until every one of them was dust. 8 names, and then 5, 2, and in the end, nothing but
Howard, Howard, Howard.
He was screaming. He was furious at his inescapable death and all the things he hadn't achieved. There were no words for the rage he felt, knowing the Chimera was taking his future, and the promise of all the great things he would create. Sure, there was fear, but it was small. His anger was a monument. Howard stumbled up the stairs to the first floor, pressing his trembling hand to the lock that would let him access the last weapon he could possibly use against the Chimera. The lock read his handprint, and the red box, bolted to the wall in the entrance to the security office, clicked open. Above, the words "in case of catastrophic breach" were written. The grenade was robin egg blue, stamped with the letters WP. Howard wasn't a soldier, but in a way, he knew what he had done to the Chimera and so many living things before it in the pursuit of discovery had made him a monster. He knew he would never escape the flames of the white phosphorus grenade, but he didn't care at that point. If the Chimera would not belong to him, tell him its secrets, then he would torch it to the ground. Howard didn't lure the Chimera into the bathroom and pull the pin to save the rest of humankind. No. He was a selfish man, as well as a brilliant one, and if the Chimera was going to deny him, then he'd rather kill the both of them than let it go.
Howard, Howard, Howard.
It chanted, the wet, heavy sound of it growing closer and closer. He saw the tentacles first, patterns that looked almost like letters flickering and fading in the depths of them, before the center mass. He backed up, leading it in, until the Chimera had shoved its viscous body through the entire bathroom doorway, expanding on the other side to its full size. Then, he pulled the pin, and everything was searing, white-red, shining pain. His universe narrowed down to the swan song of his nerve endings dying, and the miserable howl of the Chimera. Good. Good. I hope it hurts, you fucking bastard. Howard Brighton woke once in the rubble of Viridian, to the faces of soldiers and the blissful sleep that came with an overload of morphine. His next inkling of awareness was in the hospital bed, but he was still deep beneath the drug-induced haze that they had put him in. There was no doubt in his mind that the soldiers had been part of the Eclipse Initiative, and that he had found himself under the tender, cold care of the Umbral Group. His injuries would be beyond the power of any civilian hospital to repair, but Umbral, hell, he might actually live. In some capacity, at least. During the night, when his blood was swimming with enough medication to give him a chance to actually think without being poked and prodded, Howard considered what his life would look like upon waking. Death didn't seem so bad, compared to the silver, cutting, scorching edge of the white phosphorus. But if he was with Umbral, then he would not have a choice in the matter. He would live, just so they could know the things that Howard had collected inside of his mind. It was in that nighttime quiet, with crickets chirping right outside the windows, harmonizing with the beeping of the machines keeping him alive, that he heard it. First, just a sound like the intake of breath before a person speaks. And then, a huff, over and over again. A lipless, tongueless mouth forming the H sound. How? He thought it might ask, but it was so soft that he might have dreamt it. Howard didn't force himself to claw back to consciousness until the actual word came into existence. Right there, floating through the heavy pressure behind his eyes. Somewhere below him, nearly frozen, the Chimera chanted,
Howard, Howard, Howard.
Under the Eclipse Initiative, the Umbral Group activated one of their best teams, Ares, to clear Viridian and eliminate any part of Project Chimera that had been left behind. The team succeeded and even brought back the requested samples and the half-dead body of Howard Brighton. They needed that man more than anything else, because not even Ares knew the Chimera was the secondary of the two threats. But Howard knew. He knew about the pilots, whatever little there was to know at least, and that knowledge might be the key to finding them. Those three dark figures weren't the raging boneless mass of the Chimera. They were sharp, intelligent, deadly beings, and they were missing. The pilots left nothing behind, not even footprints to track them. The only likely sign of them wasn't found until weeks later. In a small cave beneath an outcropping of stone, two coffee bean farmers had sat down on a boulder they must have visited hundreds of times to take a break and have their lunch. Their wives found them later that night, dead, their skin red and crackled like the worst imaginable sunburn. Behind them, on the stone wall, were pale silhouette shadows of the two men. It was as if whatever had killed them had flashed so quickly that the men hadn't had time to move. It had scorched both the men and the wall behind them, leaving the shape of the farmers sitting, while their bodies crumpled to the ground.